Good day, good afternoon. We have here with us today Vanja Škorić. She's currently a program director at the Netherlands-based society organization, European Center for Knowledge. She oversees global and European engagement programs, has 20 years of experience in analysis, research, litigation, and strategic campaigning. She's currently specializing, and she's an expert in artificial intelligence issues affecting civil freedoms and human rights in general. And she works on different issues related to artificial intelligence. But she has extensive experience in civil society organizations at both international and national level, and especially in anti-corruption efforts. So prior to her current job, she was one of the key activists in Croatian leading NGO. Vong has left an extremely valuable heritage in Croatian democratic development, government accountability, and anti-corruption with their activities, efforts they did to promote values and especially anti-corruption. So Vanja can really help us to better understand the role of civil society in prevention and corruption. So good day, Vanja.
Hello.
And so can you tell us what are the most effective instruments civil society can apply in their attempts to make a better society in general? What actually civil society organizations do?
Well, in general, civil society sits in between the private sector, the business sector, and the governmental sector, so the governments and institutions, and kind of lends its voice to the people, either citizens or non-citizens, but broadly different groups of people and individuals. And when civil society is viewed as an actor, with that voice, then they have a number of different instruments and tools and activities that they do in order to make that voice heard. So, for example, they do policy advocacy and research, and then they use the research evidence to advocate for something or for someone. For example, to influence legislation, to participate in different institutional developments, public consultations, to draft different documents and policies that will hopefully enhance or improve somebody's rights. Then civil society can be also a so-called watchdog. So basically that means monitoring the implementation of different policies or regulation, or simply monitoring how institutions do their job. So it's a part of the kind of a broader democratic oversight of institutions. Then civil society can also lead public awareness, public educational campaigns on some important issues that, for example, are useful for the public or for the media engagement. So they create different campaigning materials or go directly speaking with the people or speaking through the media, nowadays increasingly so through social media and investigative so-called people's journalism. And that can serve as both informing and raising awareness on some topics, but also collecting information from the public in order to name and condemn, for example, some negative behavior from the institutions. And then, of course, there's a broader coalition building, networking, so different civil society organizations come together in different networks or coalitions to collaborate, to jointly form different advocacy positions and essentially strengthen the voices of people. One very specific niche of civil society work is strategic litigation. So this is more connected to legal representation and litigation for the purpose of strategically enhancing or reviewing some of the existing legislation that can potentially be challenged or improved through judicial decisions.
Great. So you named a variety of different instruments. So in your experience, when you were working for national level, NGO, Vong, so what is your experience in using all these instruments, and how do you see Vong's work in terms of, say, eradicating increasing corruption levels in Croatia? Do you have some success stories or maybe some instruments you find very useful? Of course, if there are some missed opportunities also, some obstacles you
Of course, the work of civil society is always a mixed bag. So there's always some success, but then there's also a lot of banging on the closed door, so to speak. So in terms of the topics related to anti-corruption and transparency, Gong really works on this intersection of participation, transparency, accountability, and kind of making the institutions better positioned to be more open and transparent. So, for example, I remember one of the key successes was back in the early days of the work of Gong in 1999, changing completely electoral legislation through public petitions and signatures of people who requested the changes in order to make elections more transparent. Then, for example, we worked a lot on establishing the first Council of Open Government Partnership in Croatia. So the Open Government Partnership is a global initiative that started in the early 2000s. And it was really interesting to see Croatian institutions take part in this initiative, but they needed a kind of a push from civil society in order to really create meaningful commitments and through national action plans in order to fight corruption, right? So that kind of led to creating an anti-corruption strategy. It led to creating significant improvements in lobbying transparency and fiscal transparency in Croatian legislation. So, and these action plans where civil society really had key input were really highly rated by the Open Government Partnership independent reporting mechanism, for example, for the quality of content and quality of implementation. So that showed that there is space for civil society to really influence not only content, but also the implementation. And then maybe on the kind of a local level, there was a successful piloting of participatory budget planning. And there was particularly a case in Pazin in Istria, where Gong, in partnership with the local government and institutions in Pazin, implemented a participatory budget planning, which allowed citizens to actually co-design and co-decide with the local government how they will spend money from the local government, and transparently actually showcase what are the priorities of local citizens in one community or in one town, and then actually hold the local government accountable for spending that money on the priorities that citizens chose. And this is something that then got embedded in the local government practice. Now, of course, some of the missed opportunities and challenges that still remain, for example, the key national body regarding conflict of interest resolution. So the key commission that looks at conflict of interest is still a weakened body that is not really able to perform all of its meaningful oversight duties, despite years of advocacy, but by not only Gong, but many other institutions and individuals. Then, for example, civil society organizations, especially those that actually have an active voice, are mostly present in the regional centers. So Zagreb, Split, Rijeka, to some extent Osijek. So there's a lack of strong voices from civil society at the local level. And this is a persistent structural gap that nobody managed to kind of fill in for a variety of reasons, but that weakens the societal voice. And also, whistleblower protection still remains pretty inadequate, especially when we compare it to some European standards. And there are some formal obligations for the protection of whistleblowers, but really the implementation is rather weak and still requires a lot of attention. So these would be some of the challenges that we can mention.
Well, great. You mentioned actually extreme situations, I would say. On one hand, a pressure you had to exert to together with citizens for better electoral laws on one hand, and the other hand, a very good example of cooperation between the government. And
exactly, yeah.
between there are so many other
Exactly.
issues. Yeah, which
It's always a
it
balance.
is a very complex relationship, actually.
Exactly. It's always a balance.
Yeah. But now in the international NGO, is there something different? It's interesting what you said that there are not NGOs that much other cities. That might be because in capital they can much better influence
Of course.
government. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what about international NGOs? Who are their main say partners or points of pressure, I would say, and how they build coalitions or networks with national NGOs or between
Exactly.
them.
So we see that a lot on the European level. There is a lot of concentration in Brussels. Again, unfortunately, for example, we try to stay away from being constantly in Brussels, but the networking is critical. For example, on the regional level and the European level, many organizations, even those from Croatia, are parts of some sort of regional or European network. And this cross-border nature of collaboration comes actually from the cross-border nature of today's challenges that organizations face, right? So not one organization from one small town or one small country can actually tackle all of the issues and problems, especially if they want to advocate for more longer term solutions or more consistent and kind of strategic solutions that typically come from either global or regional level, right? So if we take an example of corruption, the actual nature of corruption that really knows no borders means that also the coalitions and civil society need to be borderless. So we do have a fantastic example of, for example, the global UNCAC coalition, so coalition on the UN level of over 400 organizations across the globe who are dedicated to fighting corruption and promoting transparency and mobilizing their members on the national level to kind of engage in joint actions which can be deciding on common positions that are requested then from the UN and national governments, facilitating exchange and knowledge, or supporting directly the national civil society efforts. So the kind of the global body and the global knowledge hub of the coalition supports, for example, the Croatian organizations who are members to hold their governments accountable, both on national level, but also in front of the international bodies. Yeah, because in some cases, naming and shaming the government on the national level is one approach, but then another approach is also doing that or at least arguing that the government has not done enough in multilateral or international spaces where the governmental delegation will kind of feel embarrassed, at least, that somebody's naming them in front of all the other governments to, not do their work properly, right? So that has its place and impact on advocacy as well.
Thank you. Good description. And what would you say, for example, if you had an opportunity to say something important to the governments all over the world? How should they approach civil society? Why is civil society important? And also, if you would advise civil society organizations, what, let's say, 3 most important instruments they could use to pursue an agenda, especially if it's unfortunate, because we are very interested in that particular topic.
Of course. So the main message to the government is always similar. Treat civil society as a potential constructive partner and not a threat. Unfortunately, we see that the governments restrict civil society activities and undermine their voices. which only creates additional ruptures and conflicts, and maybe even unnecessary loss of energy in those types of exchanges. Whereas civil society can actually, in situations where it's really needed, be a good, constructive, critical, but actually very useful partner in improving the policies and the implementation. Another advice is not to use different strategies or different commitments that the governments make as just a tick box exercise, right? Commitments to, if we speak about corruption, to eradicate corruption and to make everything more transparent, have real political accountability, right? Not just bureaucratic compliance. So the experience shows that the quality of the implementation really matters long term, and we are kind of shooting ourselves in the foot if the governments only kind of do the tick the box exercise and not really invest in a real implementation, in real independent oversight institutions, and in real constructive engagement with civil society. For the civil society and citizens in more generally, we would say be strategic about choosing the battles and building the coalitions. Rarely it is possible to achieve systemic change on their own. So kind of building both domestic and then international and regional networks and coalitions has enormous influence. And use every leverage that is available. There are multiple international and regional institutions that the government is a part of or the country is a part of. So this can be also mechanisms and leverages to kind of push the needle a little bit further. And always use the voice and advocate on the basis of the actual evidence, right? So this is very important, to showcase always the arguments, the evidence, the research behind, or the actual citizen needs and voices behind, because that's something that actually resonates with governmental institutions once they open up enough for a dialogue. Involving citizens in that outreach also makes a difference and makes better policies and ultimately better society.
Thank you very much. There's a summary.
Thank you.
Both sides. So thank you very much. And students. Thanks.
Thank you and good luck.